After a super serious character-driven episode like Masks, I'm all for a little bit of fun throwaway filler, and that's what this episode, Mad Mod, gives us. A fun throwaway filler episode, mostly focusing on the style of comedy that this show is good at, and acts as a bit of a palate cleanser after such a serious episode, and also serves to fill time until the premise of that episode can be further explored in the finale of the first season. Now, I want to be clear about a couple of things, because I know if I don't preface some of the stuff I'm going to say, people are going to think that I hate this episode or hate the comedy in this show, or even that I think the episode is bad because I call it filler. None of those things are true, but this episode is still filler, and there is nothing wrong with that. As long as filler is entertaining and doesn't take anything away from the characters, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. But this episode is filler. The story isn't furthered in this episode, and the characters aren't furthered in this episode, though the characterization is at least consistent. Therefore, this episode is, by definition, filler. It just happens to be pretty solid filler. It is the first majority comedy episode of the show, and therefore sets the pattern that the Japanese version of the Teen Titans opening, which is the sillier version, the lyrics of it make absolutely no sense, tends to be played before comedy episodes rather than serious ones. And it introduces the comedy villain of Mad Mod, a character whose superpowers include being annoyingly hyperactively British and also some unparalleled tech mastery that I'm sure isn't going to come into play in this episode at all. He has kidnapped the Titans, managing somehow to pump knockout gas into their tower and throughout the entire tower so that he could do so, as well as design special chairs that nullify their abilities. And he has brought them to a school that he has constructed where he is going to teach them not to be superheroes, I guess, because being a teen superhero disrespects their elders who are also villains, by hypnotizing them so thoroughly that it puts them into trances which will eventually erase their minds. Robin escapes pretty easily and confronts Mad Mod, who seems to have the ability to control the entire environment around him using the cane that he carries. In fact, the kind of things that he can do with that cane seem like complete nonsense. And Robin's initial chase after him eventually devolves into something which resembles a Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoon. Like, they even do the tunnel thing from the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoon. Mod is able to run on ceilings, and he's able to seemingly stretch out environments to absurd lengths to force Robin back. And all throughout the building there are these busts of Mod which can become deadly weapons by floating around and producing weapons out of various parts of his head and face. It's all goofy, but it's still an effective method of fighting, and therefore lends itself to the sillier visuals of this episode without lowering the stakes at all. And throughout the entire episode, there's this nagging feeling that things just don't make sense. How is Mod doing all of the things that he's doing, and why, when he seemed to be actually winning against Robin, did he finally retreat rather than fight Robin directly? It doesn't seem like he's physically incapable or anything. And him retreating allows Robin time to go and save Starfire, who is unable to free herself. They free Beast Boy too, but he's actually been successfully hypnotized by Mod's hypno screens, starting a running joke throughout the episode that Beast Boy is simple-minded enough that this just affects him really well. But it doesn't invalidate him as a hero either, which I find really interesting. We still see him fighting effectively and even saving the others throughout the rest of the episode. They managed to bring him back by making jokes, by making him laugh. Most of them involve, like, saying the word booger or burping in his face, stuff like that. And we learn that Raven and Cyborg were able to free themselves, so we don't have to worry about freeing them. And so now that all 5 of the Titans are back together, they try to confront Mod again. This happens at about the halfway point, and pretty much the rest of the episode is just, like, comedy action scenes, which, again, that's perfectly fine. Filler is perfectly fine as long as it's entertaining, so even time filler within a filler episode is fine so long as it's entertaining, and the visuals are certainly entertaining. I particularly like all of the nods to Western animation, Western cartoons like Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera stuff specifically, that are littered throughout this episode, because the show itself is pretty much a love letter to Eastern animation. Throwing in some nods to Western animation, too, I think is a really nice touch. Like, at one point, they're in this room with all these spots drawn on the floors, and they're able to fall through the spots even though they're just drawn there, and even peel the spots up and show that there's no holes underneath them. That is a very Looney Tunes kind of thing, and at one point they do the Hanna-Barbera Scooby-Doo hallway with a bunch of doors thing where they run randomly between the different rooms without actually going from room to room. It was really neat and kind of odd to see in this animation style, but I still liked it. The juxtaposition was good. Eventually, all of this culminates in a more direct action sequence where they're fighting Maud more directly, and suddenly all the tricks that he's pulling start to seem more rational. There seems to be tech which is facilitating all the things that he's doing. That still doesn't explain how Maud himself was able to do some of the things that he did until Robin tries to snatch his cane away, and we see that Maud and the cane are holograms. Maud has been using a combination of probably like ambient hypnosis effects along with an entirely modular building and a hologram of himself to fool the Titans into thinking that he was basically omniscient. In fact, Robin escapes into the machinery and finds the actual Maud in his control room, and he's significantly older and not nearly as fit and is no match for Robin in the end. They escape, and everyone except for Maud, because he's going to prison, goes home happy. And I gotta say, as the first primarily comedy episode of this show, I like this one probably the best of any such episodes of the series. But I'm still not a huge fan of the comedy in this show. Now, don't get me wrong, I find it very amusing and entertaining to watch. It doesn't make me laugh out loud. And I do think that an entire 22-minute episode focused on nothing but this show's style of comedy is kind of boring, and that's why I appreciate that this one has good, rational action in it as well. This episode at least tries to explain rationally everything that happened to the characters. Maybe I'm forgetting a detail here and there, but as far as I recall, there are episodes later in the series which are styled after this one that don't do that. But I just want to be clear, I don't dislike the comedy in this show entirely. I still find it entertaining. And that's why, in part, I was so disappointed with the way that Teen Titans Go went. I expected Teen Titans Go to be the characters in kind of their off time, focusing on stories that revolved around this kind of humor, but only took up 11 minutes of airtime per story, foregoing the action elements and just focusing on a shorter form version of the comedy, and that sounded really entertaining to me, and that's just not what we ended up getting. And there is good stuff in this episode aside from the comedy stuff. I know some orders for the series put this episode before Masks rather than after, but regardless of where you put it in relation to Masks, it's very interesting to watch Starfire and Robin interact in this episode, because if you place it before Masks, you can see that he does care about her more than the others. Like, he still cares about the others a lot, but he has additional feelings for Starfire, and that explains why he went so crazy when she almost died in Masks. But if you place this episode after Masks, his behavior suddenly seems like not only does he have additional feelings for Starfire, but he's also trying to make it up to her that he betrayed her so badly. That is good, consistent characterization, and exactly the kind of characterization that should go into a filler episode, since theoretically a filler episode should be able to fill up time anywhere in its current season. At the end of the day, not everything about this episode is for me, but it's still a lot of fun. Mad Mod manages to be a pretty interesting villain in concept, even if I thought his personality was a little too shallow to really enjoy his presence, and even though for most of this episode he was treated as a Mumbo clone with a magic cane instead of a magic wand, he was still entertaining to watch. But as per usual, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of the episode Mad Mod if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.